You know you love the story so far. Like and subscribe.
Chapter 21, Cats and Veterinarians. The meeting that followed brought relief. Shri was under orders to both provide assistance with the base fortifications and integrate into the Crathen military network. Classified military secrets became instantly available to us. Shri'Fa had already begun incorporating Crathen medical technology into our human medical facility. So much was already unfolding behind the scenes, while Shay and I were preoccupied with the prospect of breaking away from the Crathen Council. The idea of using our small shipyard as a repair station for the Predator's hope originated with Shri. It was the only way to stall the Council from seizing control of our mining operations. "How many humans have you recruited to your cause?" Shri queried. "We have only just begun filling our security positions," I answered. "Gracia has been screening possible medical personnel." "I think we should accelerate our timetable," Kess commented. "There are enough of our people to expedite operations." Shay glanced up at Hamble, who was standing quietly by the door. "Do you think you could spare your team for recruitment missions?" "If you have enough security to cover the base," he shrugged. "They are adaptable. I will still require you and Mitchell to lead contact interviews." "We could utilize Brown as a medical recruiter," I commented thoughtfully. "Shri'Fa could brief him on the requisite needs." Hamble nodded. "I could assign Markham to assume my duties while the rest of my team reaches out to anyone Gracia identifies." We adjourned an hour later as a plan began to form. Shri insisted on utilizing the remaining afternoon orienting his staff to the facility. The current plan revolved around recruiting medical personnel to expedite the facility development and identifying technology that would entice multiple governments to negotiate. Our secondary objective involved approaching aerospace industries to slowly advance spaceflight technology to facilitate eventual mining operations. Most of our plans, of course, were meant to fly under the radar of influential governments for as long as feasible. They would, of course, eventually catch on, but if we played our cards right, it would be too late to intervene. We found Shri'Fa supervising the installation of Crathen medical equipment despite Chief Brown's objections. "We need that," he yelled in English. Shri'Fa could understand him with the use of her translator, but apparently chose to ignore him, feigning ignorance of his words. "I see you have met Dr. Phi," I shouted at Brown over the noise. Brown threw his arms up in frustration. "She refuses to listen to me," he huffed in his deep voice. "She has ordered our medical equipment removed. It's too primitive," she claims. I laughed for the first time since our guests arrived. "She is right about the equipment," I mused. "I need you to provide everything you can about human medicine." I looked over at Shri'Fa and yelled for her to hear. "I need the two of you to work together." Shri'Fa looked up from her equipment calibration. "He is inadequate," she countered defensively as she approached. "He has no understanding of medicine," she continued in a measured tone once she approached. "Chief Brown understands more about medicine than I do," I assured her. "He needs to understand Crathen medical techniques and how to adapt them for human use. He is our current human medical expert." I looked at Brown. "You will be heading up the medical recruitment initiative based on Dr. Faw's recommendations." Brown looked from me to Shri'Fa and back. "Maybe we should consider veterinarians," he said sarcastically. It had never dawned on me to include veterinarians in our medical staff. They would be the ideal doctors to train in Crathen physiology. Approaching the medical treatment of Crathen as giant cats might facilitate an accelerated understanding. "That is not a bad idea," I remarked to both their surprise. "I would consider those who specialize in large cats." "We are nothing like your Earth cats," Shri'Fa rebuked. "You look like one," Brown countered with a smug expression. Shri'Fa growled in response, which just made Brown laugh. "I'll check the local zoo," Shri'Fa hissed in response. "I'll let you two work it out," I remarked in barely suppressed amusement. I made a hasty retreat lest I laugh out loud. I tapped a memo to Chief Brown, reminding him to offer everything on human medicine he could find. I wandered the compound, taking in all the commotion. Crathen continued to come and go throughout the night, bringing supplies down. There would, of course, be no weapons beyond the stun pistols all shipboard Crathen were expected to carry when on a potentially hostile planet. Shay and I had been adamant about the introduction of military-grade weapons on Earth, just in case we were to become compromised. Medical technology and outdated civilian space tech were acceptable. I turned instantly at the sound of air being displaced by a flying object. I managed to barely snatch the ball out of the air as Latra approached. He wore basic Crathen military attire. Only the humorous rotation of his ears and the lazy swing of his tail interrupted his usual stoic demeanor. "I see you remembered my lesson," he commented casually. I smiled a human smile in spite of myself. "I want to thank you for the gift you sent with me," I responded. "I fortunately have not had need to use it." "You have surrounded yourself with other defenses," he said as he gestured to the surrounding compound. We did not shake hands or touch in a familial way at all. We simply began walking together, observing the activity unfolding around us. "I still leave the security of this each time I approach new recruits." "I see," he said without looking at me. His eyes continually scanned the area for any dangers, while mapping every inch of the facility for future reference. "Scorsese has asked me to assess your human security's abilities," and he commented casually, as if talking about the weather. "I am told they are from your special military community." I nodded. "They are specialists in their respective fields. Some are more combat-oriented than others, however." "I have observed them." He looked over at me then, worried. "Most are damaged," he said flatly. "In some way or another," I admitted. "Soldiers like Markham were brought in for their knowledge more than his physical capabilities." I stopped suddenly and turned to him. "Are you aware of military prosthetics that might help him regain normal function?" Lutra's ears dipped slightly, swiveled, and righted themselves once more. He hesitated before nodding. "Shri'Fa would have to authorize them, but yes." "Then I will speak with her." We began walking again. "We take care of anyone who chooses to join us. We demand absolute loyalty and offer it in return," I explained. "Noble sentiment," Latra remarked casually. "What if someone betrays you?" "That is a risk we take," I responded solemnly. I glanced at Latra with a cold expression. "The punishment will depend on the transgression." I hated the direction the conversation was going. I knew what Latra was hinting at. Would I resort to killing one of our own should they betray us? The truth was that I did not know. I had considered it and even spoken with Shay about it, but I simply refused to entertain the idea in detail. "I would like you to oversee the training of our new security and Crathen combat techniques," I said, changing the subject. "Just don't inflict more injuries than Shri'Fa can fix. They do not have the benefit of nanites to speed up their healing." Latra nodded once and walked away in the direction of the security barracks. I staggered into our quarters late in the morning. Night operations tend to wear on the body. The only solace was the ability to lean on others to pick up the recruitment duties. I would have to spend less time traveling during the day and staying up at night when I was home. I glanced around the room in search of Shay. She had not returned from whatever crisis had kept her. There always seemed to be some crisis one of us had to attend to personally. I let out a sigh as I entered the bathroom and began to undress for a shower. It had two settings instead of the paint-peeling torrent the Crathen needed to penetrate their fur. I still preferred a strong spray, but it was still about half that of the Crathen setting. The compromise was the ability to adjust the strength of the shower. I was just finishing up when I heard Shay enter the room. She said nothing as she disrobed and climbed into the shower behind me. One of the joys of no longer living on a ship was the ability to have a near unlimited supply of water and a shower large enough to accommodate us both easily. I leaned into her embrace as she wrapped her arms around me and nuzzled the side of my face. Neither of us spoke, reveling in the nearness of the moment. Each day seemed to pull us away from each other more and more, and we began to spend less and less time together. After several long minutes, I turned to look up into her tired eyes. I knew the expression well. It was one I studied every time I looked into the mirror. I leaned forward to kiss her while simultaneously reaching behind her to turn up the water pressure. I grabbed the bottle of berry-scented shampoo she liked so much and began lathering it into her thin fur. It made it easier to lather it into the skin beneath now that she had finally stopped shedding. The past month had been difficult on the plumbing, to put it mildly. An engineer had to be called in at least once a week to clean out the system until the drainage system was declared faulty. The end result was the newly expanded grate system and increased drainpipe diameter. A new filtration system was already in the works to clean out the excessive amounts of fur that was beginning to accumulate. With the arrival of more Crathen, I imagined it would have to undergo another redesign. Shay began to purr, while I continued to scrub her fur deeply and vigorously. She turned slowly to allow me access to her entire body, while also shielding me from the stinging spray of water. Once she had completed a full revolution, she stepped closer and began tracing a single claw down my chest suggestively. I did the only thing I could do when faced with a feline alien who stood a head taller than I. I wrapped my fingers around the base of her tail and pulled her against me forcefully. The evening ended way too soon. Neither of us got much sleep before the alarm sounded, announcing the start of the new day. I groaned in protest as I struggled to dislodge myself from the sleeping fur blanket stretched partially across my body. No sooner had I hit the off button than I felt myself pulled back into bed. Shay's wrist communicator went off 15 minutes later. She answered it with a low growl. "What?" Frey's voice crackled hesitantly over the device. "Is this a bad time?" she asked wearily. Shay just stared at the device like it owed her money until Frey apologized and ended the call. The evening was half over by the time we emerged from the bedroom. Kiari had obviously given up on waiting for us and had gone in search of food and entertainment. There were no messages waiting for us as there normally were. Nobody attempted to stop us as we moved through the expansive halls toward the diplomatic wing. The dining hall was empty when we entered, which was unusual for the hour. We were about to sit down for lunch when the alarms began to sound throughout the compound. Code red, flight hangar. Code red, flight hangar. Shay and I were on the move instantly, our lunch forgotten. The halls were suspiciously empty throughout our dash for the main flight hangar. I might have been more suspicious had we not been responding to an emergency. We rounded the last corner into the darkening corridor when I came to a skidding halt. The silence of the area set off alarm bells in my mind. There should have been a lot of loud noises, but they were noticeably absent. Shay stopped beside me. "What is it?" "Something is wrong," I whispered, straining to listen through the deafening silence ahead. Shay shook her head and began to walk ahead, but I grabbed her shoulder. I placed a finger over my lips and crept forward. No sooner had I cracked the door open than the lights flared blindingly bright. "Happy birthday!" I stood stunned as though I had just been slapped. When my vision cleared, dozens of Crathen and humans stood around folding tables laden with food and sweets. The humans present clapped and laughed while the Crathen did their best to express happiness for a celebration they obviously did not understand. Shay stepped past, giving me a loving rough lick on my cheek before turning to face me. "We thought we would share human custom with you. Today is your birthday." I glanced around the room at everyone gathered in genuine surprise. "I honestly forgot," I said to Shay. "It was Kiari's idea," she explained. "She has become infatuated with human customs." Kiari appeared as if summoned. She sprinted the distance from the crowd and leapt into my arms. "You like?" she asked gleefully. I rubbed my face against hers affectionately. "Very much so. Thank you." She scampered down out of my arms and began dragging me toward one of the tables that held a chocolate-covered cake adorned with way too many candles. Hamble smiled and lit the candles before stepping back. "You're supposed to blow them out," Kiari explained when I did not immediately react. Shay and I stood together watching both humans and Crathen intermingle seamlessly. "This is all I could ever wish for," I said, gesturing to the crowd with a piece of cake held between my fingers. Both our people interacting civilly. There was still much to learn from each other, but both sides were cooperating. "We are proof of that," Shay countered as she took my free hand. "Our daughter is the manifestation of the compatibility between our species." "I just wonder if our civilizations are compatible," I mused half to myself. "We will just build our own if they are not," Shay assured, squeezing my hand. The celebration wore on well into the morning without incident. Mixed groups began to form as conversations hummed like a swarm of bees. Most were incomprehensible and involved members from the individual departments. Some revolved around medical concerns. Others involved security. There were the outliers, of course. Latra stood with Miotre watching the crowd with imperceptible expressions. Unless, of course, you knew how to read their body language. Each occasionally leaned over to say something cryptic to the other, but otherwise kept their own counsel. There were presents brought forth right at the end. Most were simple things. Kiari presented me with a doll she had crafted from electrical wires of varying colors. Atop the head were the wispy fiber optic wires that represented the Crathen mane. She chittered incomprehensibly with excitement about each detail. I smiled and nodded understanding, and made the appropriate noises despite understanding only a handful of words. Latras stepped forward to offer me an intricately designed sword with a blue jewel set in the hilt. Despite its ornate design, the blade was extremely durable and would cut through steel like butter. There were many other simpler gifts from those who were obviously at a loss as to what to get, but each was precious in its meaning. Shay was the last to present her gift. I expected some profound revelation or a simple gesture, but she waved to Frey, who tapped her communicator, and the overhead door began to slowly part with the grinding sound of oiled gears moving together until they were opened a couple 100 feet. The low-hanging moon was soon obscured by a shimmering shadow that emitted a low whine as it descended gracefully to land on heavy struts that allowed the ship to bounce slightly. The lines were seamless. The deep black coating seemed to bend the room around it, so it almost blended in with the background behind it. A rear hatch opened and lowered, and Major Lewis stepped out wearing a tight-fitting flight suit and a grin. "This is your latest shuttle," Shay explained, standing by my shoulder. I glanced over at her in astonishment. "It is the culmination of our most advanced tech. Lewis and Frey have been spending the past month perfecting their mastery of it." I walked over to explore the dark obsidian of its hull, running my fingers along it. I almost regretted how the oils from my skin streaked the surface where I dragged my fingers. The inside was bathed in blue light, common to Crathen displays. The interior was built predominantly with utility in mind. There were 4 jump seats against the bulkhead, separating the flight room from the passenger compartment. There were 4 other seats along the walls built with obvious human comfort in mind, each capable of swiveling and reclining. The detail that struck me most was the minimalist design of the crew compartment in comparison to the outer hull. "Beautiful, isn't she?" Lewis remarked, still smiling, like a cat who had gotten into the cream. "We designed it as a dual-purpose shuttle. Its primary function is for diplomatic use, but the defensive capabilities are mind-blowing." "There is a lot of ship in comparison to the crew compartment," I commented. "That's because more than half of the ship consists of electronics, engines, and a mixture of defensive and offensive systems," Lewis explained excitedly. "There is a sister ship being built currently for Shay." Latra stepped inside, glancing around. "Everyone on your detail will be required to know how to pilot the ship." He leveled his eyes on me. "That includes you." I met Lewis and Frey in the flight hangar the next morning. Both worked inside, inspecting the contents of hidden compartments I never noticed the night before. Each contained either weapons, gear, or other miscellaneous supplies. "Good morning, sir," Lewis greeted as I stepped inside. The better part of the day consisted of familiarization of the contents of each compartment. Much of it was intended for security use, but there were also food rations, medical supplies, and a compartment containing both diplomatic and casual attire for both me and Shay. There was even a small crate containing clothing for Coyote. The part that interested me most was the tiny shower concealed between the bulkhead and the flight compartment. It was thankfully built to accommodate Crathens, which meant there was plenty of room for me. The flight compartment was also built for comfort as well as practical use. The seats were adjustable for long-duration flights to allow one to sleep while the other monitored the controls. Every available space contained switches, buttons, or monitors. The primary view screen wrapped across the entirety of the forward section. Each monitor glowed either blue or gold, depending on its function. Each seat contained a helmet complete with augmented reality function hidden behind a darkened visor. The only difference was in their design. One was clearly meant for a Crathen pilot while the other human. Each offered a 360-degree view around the ship, along with terrain mapping. The second half of the day consisted of familiarization of each control available to the pilots. Frey expected me to memorize each switch and where to find it blindly. "This is going to take me months," I grumbled at one point when she scolded me for the umpteenth time when I flipped the wrong toggle. "We have built a simulator for trainees to learn," she commented helpfully. "I recommend utilizing it." "Great," I grumbled. "Something else to occupy more of my time." "You and Shay practice together," Frey snapped back. "Your life may one day depend on it. Everyone on your detail must master every item on this ship, including the ship itself." Frey took me up the next morning to demonstrate the capabilities of the new craft. The acceleration was unlike anything I had ever felt before. Even with the inertial dampeners shielding the occupants within, I could feel the force pressing down on me like a boulder that left me almost breathless. The ship sped across the terrain like a bullet fired from a gun. Each banking turn shifted the boulder in a different direction. The seat constantly adjusted to accommodate each motion, while the flight suit made its own adjustments to promote proper blood circulation. Without each piece of equipment working seamlessly together, the pilot would easily be rendered unconscious or even killed. Without the suit, seat, and inertial dampeners operating in conjunction, the occupants would become nothing more than a smear against a bulkhead during max acceleration. Any human seated in the back would definitely be rendered unconscious despite the dampeners without a suit. Even the unprotected Crathen would struggle against the force. We landed after 2 hours of intense maneuvers that left my stomach twisted into knots and my head swimming with dizzying uncertainty. My entire body ached from constant strain. I barely managed to step out the hatch when my stomach began to rebel against the abuse. There was little to rid my body of thanks to Lewis's warning the night before. I was sure I would not have been able to walk to the back of the ship had it not been for the assistance of the flight suit. I still wore it when I returned to our quarters half an hour later to shower.
I hope you have enjoyed the story so far. Please like and subscribe.